Did you know that dwarves hate the orcs much more than they dislike elves? In between the loss of Erebor by the dragon Smaug and the creation of the company of Thorin Oakenshield, there was a short war between dwarves and orcs that almost destroyed the descendants of Durin. The animosity between these two races, and the fact that the dwarves were left alone against all their loss and sorrow, led them to fight in one of the most bloody wars of the Third Age of Middle-earth. A conflict that very few know about. Today on Fantasy Archive, we will delve into this unknown war between the most fierce races in Middle-earth, while we explain to you how this conflict originated, and how the dwarves ended up where they started, even when defying all odds. Dwarves and orcs have a long history of conflict and animosity in Middle-earth. These two races often come into discord over territory and resources. Dwarves, known for their craftsmanship and love of precious metals and gems, frequently establish strongholds in mountains and underground realms where they mine for riches. The orcs, being creatures of darkness and followers of evil, are drawn to these underground realms as well. Wanting to leverage on the dwarves' work, they frequently raid dwarven strongholds in pursuit of wealth and power. These clashes lead to a cycle of retaliatory attacks and deep-seated grudges. The orcs' constant interest in taking and living in the same underground cities has created the main conflicts between the Longbeards and the decaying elves, transforming places like Mount Gundabad and Khazad-dûm into settings where blood has been dropped by the thousands. The dwarves and orcs' interests in real estate seem to be their only thing in common, since they have vastly different cultures and values. Dwarves take great pride in their craftsmanship, honor, and loyalty to their kin. They value the beauty and skill put into their creations. They hold a deep sense of duty and tradition. In contrast, orcs are inherently cruel, violent, and destructive. They enjoy themselves in chaos and destruction, showing no regard for beauty or artistry. These fundamental differences in culture and values make it difficult for the two races to find common ground or peaceful coexistence. Nobody saw the attack coming, so when Smaug assaulted Erebor, the dwarves were unprepared and unable to do anything about it, having to flee their home to leave it in control of the fire-breathing dragon. After that, the dwarves were lost in the wild. With Erebor lost and Gundabad and Khazad-dûm controlled by the orcs, the situation for the people of Durin was very delicate and eerie. Eventually, they found a home in Dunland, but after years of living in poverty, King Thror couldn't handle the situation anymore, and even if some people say the situation was provoked by the influence of his ring, one of the seven, in 2790, he left his people to visit the ancient kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Thror, however, wasn't alone. His friend Nair went with him, and after days of walking, they arrived at the eastern gate of Moria. Once there, Thror decided to go in alone, even with the warnings of his friend. Sadly, after some days, the head of the Dwarven King flew from inside of Moria to Nair's feet, with the name Azog written on it, declaring himself King of Moria. Yes, this is the same Azog that acts as the main antagonist for the Hobbit trilogy and arch-enemy of Thorin. We see him dramatically beheading the king in mid-battle, but in the books this scene is never seen or lived by the reader. Azog beheads Thor in Moria, but rolls the king's head out of the eastern gate with his name branded in runes on the king's head. He let Nair live to serve as a messenger that Azog now ruled in Moria, and if any dwarves dared enter there again, they will share the same fate. He threw a pouch of coins for his messenger's services. This incident was the catalyst that made the new king Thrain II declare war on the orcs of Moria and Gundabad. The war started in 2793, and before we tell you anything, you must know that little is known about this point in the history of Middle-earth, because Tolkien never wrote too much about it. What we can tell you is that the war consisted of sacking all the kingdoms that the orcs had taken from the dwarves, making the first target the one found in Mount Gundabad. Then, after 6 long years, the dwarves were never able to conquer Gundabad, which drove them to try another strategy. An act of revenge against the so-called King of Moria, Azog. The Battle of Azalnulbizar was the final conflict of the war between dwarves and orcs. A bloody and cruel battle that confronted the Longbeards and dwarves from other dwarven houses against the orcs of the Misty Mountains. Said conflict was fought in the east gate of Moria. The same place where more than 200 years after the Fellowship would exit Khazad-dûm after facing Durin's bane. The day of the battle began with a cloudy sky that blocked most of the sunlight, a thing that helped the orcs on the battlefield. There, more than 1,000 orcs waited for the dwarves from the get-go. After the armies clashed, even more orcs and goblins came pouring out from inside the kingdom of Moria. The exact number of dwarves is not specified, but it can be estimated between 6,000 and 12,000 Longbeards, Stiffbeards, Firebeards, Ironfists, Blacklocks, Stonefoots, and Broadbeams. This estimation is based on the assumption that the other dwarven houses did not send more than a few thousand to participate in the war, due to economic, financial, and defensive reasons. The Longbeards could not have gathered a combat force larger than 3,000 soldiers, given their greatly diminished population and financial/economic issues. The Orcs came from Moria and from the north from Mount Gundabad. Their numbers could be estimated between 50 and 60,000. The newly appointed king, Thrain II, led the first attack, but was driven back by the Orcs, who showed no mercy or intention of taking it slow. After that, Thorin had to intervene and save his father, who lost an eye while fighting the enemy. After getting his shield destroyed, Thorin cut an oaken branch from a nearby tree, using it as his new shield, and also gaining the nickname that would die with him at the Battle of the Five Armies. On another place, Nain, Thror's best confidant, took his dwarves and started to shout Azog's name, instigating him to come out of Moria and face them. Azog complied and emerged with his guard. After a brutal duel, fueled by Nain's hate of Azog and vice versa, the dwarf missed a swing that allowed Azog to finish him by breaking his neck. While celebrating his victory, Azog came to a sudden realization. His army was on the run, and his guard was dead. Then, when trying to flee inside Moria, Dane, son of Nain and new lord of the Iron Hills, took that opportunity to make the biggest and longest leap possible, while using his red axe, cutting the orc's head, winning the battle. Therefore, the Azog's character in The Hobbit was a creative leap because in the books he is killed in the Battle of Azalnulbizar, and never gets to interfere with Thorin's company, nor participate in the Battle of the Five Armies. We have to take into account that Dane was only 32 years old when he killed Azog, an insignificant number for a dwarf who can live hundreds of years. As he did with Thror, Azog's head was put onto the end of a spike, culminating a cruel war that, in the end, didn't help them much. As you might ask, but the dwarves won the Battle of Azalnulbizar. That's true. The thing is that when Dane slayed Azog, he saw something terrible emanating from inside Moria, the Balrog of Morgoth. After the vision of Durin's bane, the dwarves decided to retire. They couldn't face a Balrog, even if they had all their armies intact. After craving stone tomes and burning some of the dead, stripping the bodies so the orcs couldn't plunder them, all of the dwarves abandoned the battlefield, leaving Moria behind and asking themselves if someday they could find a new home for the people of Erebor, who remained homeless, even after so many years of constant war. Luckily, 200 years after these events, the company of Thorin Oakenshield was created in Bag End, where they also found the 14th member of their group, a burglar named Bilbo Baggins.